Welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, Collin, and I'm joined by Nick as we're talking about the opening weekend for The Rise of Skywalker, as well as Cats and Bombshell. Remember, as always, you can check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com. So, breaking down this week's top 5 at the box office, we've got Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, in the first spot with $175.5 million, followed by Jumanji the next week in its second week, $6 million, Frozen 2 in the number 3 spot with 12.3, followed by Cats opening up at 6.5 million, and Knives Out rounds out the top 5 at 6.125 million. So it wasn't a very competitive week, but nobody really expected it to be. Star Wars is in the top spot, 175 billion, but it is pretty significantly below the opening weekends for the previous two films. So the previous two films both set the record for opening weekends. So like in 2015 when Star Wars came out, Jurassic World 200 and it did like $208 million for its opening weekend domestically, and then The Force Awakens blew that out of the water with 247, which was the largest at that point. Last Jedi took the number 2 spot 2 years ago with 220 million, but Last Jedi is about 45 million below that and is really significant of just all the crazy stuff we've been through with Star Wars the past couple of years.
Yeah, it really just kind of shows kind of like the slowly waning interest of just Star Wars in general. It was really funny, and I'm sure we'll talk about the film at length here in a second, but I was just walking out of Rise of Skywalker. I didn't really get what this new Disney trilogy was about, and I feel like that sentiment was felt by a lot of people because I don't know, people just didn't really seem to connect to this movie. I mean, I'm sure you go on Twitter afterwards and people were freaking out about it either way, whether they liked it or didn't. It feels definitely like it's, even with all the hate towards The Last Jedi, with most of it kind of not being reasonable at all, it feels like Rise of Skywalker is probably the least favorite of the three. So yeah, it's just, this is definitely going to be the worst performing movie of the three, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I mean, even looking at it worldwide, so opening weekend worldwide, Force Awakens did $529 million almost, and then Last Jedi did $450 million, and this is 75 million below that at 374 for the opening weekend. And yeah, even people that loathe The Last Jedi haven't really grasped onto this movie just a ton. I mean, you do have some holdouts that don't know what good movies are, but overall, like, this has been pretty underwhelming and disappointing. Like, I think even worse than Solo.
Yeah, and I think it's Disney. Well, we'll get where they faltered because they definitely there's a lot to blame there. But I think they're smart and kind of taking a second to recalibrate and maybe put the feature films on hold for a little bit and kind of figure out what they want to do moving forward. Seems like everyone likes The Mandalorian. That's something I definitely need to catch up with at some point, and everyone seems happy with that there. But it just really shows with The Rise of Skywalker how just little of a plan they had going into all of this. We have these three films. We have Rogue One and Solo. It's weird. I mean, I know both of us really like The Last Jedi, and The Force Awakens is good for what it was, as a soft reboot, but I can't really say anyone has really fallen in love with any of these movies totally. I mean, there's been so much talk about Kathleen Kennedy and just kind of like the brain trust at Disney, and now Kevin Feige coming over to help out in any way he can. There hasn't been a unified vision at all with any of these movies, and I feel like The Rise of Skywalker is the one where it's just been the most obvious, where they kind of panicked after The Last Jedi came out, and this is very clearly they just kind of went to J.J. Abrams with like a big bag of cash and said, please, like, help us out and kind of maybe land this plane somehow. And he was like, all right, sure. So he had to go quickly round up a screenplay with Chris Terrio, who's worked on such great films as Justice League and Batman v Superman. So yeah, this just kind of feels like a rush job, and they wanted to just kind of put a bow on it any way they could. It's definitely not a pretty bow, but yeah, this just really feels like it's kind of Disney really dropping the ball big time.
Yeah, and I think this movie was really rushed, just time wise. So initially, this movie was supposed to have released this May, under Collin Trevorrow, and then he was fired about a month before The Last Jedi released, and so they were already short on time because this was 6 months less production time than the first one had, the episode 7, and then even episode 8 had. And then when JJ came in, they basically had to start from scratch again, but they were already in the process of things, so they had an even smaller amount of time to rewrite, write it as well as they could, and then get into moving into the story. And I think you definitely see that, just like how hobbled together this thing is. Like it's it's a Frankenstein of a movie.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, there's always those reports that break on the Friday of when a movie comes out and it had dealt with a lot of production issues. But it seems like JJ and Chris Terrio were kind of writing on the spot with this movie on set and kind of coming up with new ways to stage scenes, and kind of just, as you mentioned, kind of working with whatever set pieces they had and what planets and places they had under the Trevorrow script. But yeah, it is a mess. It is. I mean, I don't really love speaking on a hyperbole, but I feel like it's one of the worst blockbuster scripts of this decade. Like it's really, really bad, and I feel like a lot of the love for it just comes from people's general love for Star Wars, because just scenes don't make sense. I feel like we'll probably leave spoilers here to a minimum, because I feel like definitely Brennan will want to kind of jump in, and we'll probably want to dissect this fully in some kind of spoiler pod coming up. But there's just scenes where people just disappear. It's like, oh, just kidding, they're back. And there's MacGuffins that lead to other MacGuffins. Just total rewrites just feel really bad and just really don't do service to Rian Johnson whatsoever, and maybe even The Force Awakens as well. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, it really feels like JJ and Chris Terrio, they were kind of just handed something that was kind of doomed from the start, considering all the production issues, and you have to meet the date. And there was, I don't know, it seems like moving this movie back to 2020 would have been sensible, but no, you have to meet this date because Disney planted their flag, and there's just so many other things. And yeah, it's just really rough. I feel like there's so much hate going on for JJ, and I don't really necessarily blame him for this one. This just really just feels like a failure all around, and just it seems like all the actors just kind of over for Star Wars. There's a really interesting interview with John Boyega sometime during this press run, where they interviewer asked him if he wanted to return as Finn at some point, and he basically said, "I ain't getting Disney Plus," which is really funny. So like, yeah, it just seems like this was just kind of a movie that everyone had to kind of fulfill their contractual obligations, and no one went the extra mile with it, I should say. It's incredibly messy, and it really bothers me.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that this was supposed to have begun filming in January 2018. It didn't start filming until last August, which is just completely insane, because something like Star Wars normally takes like 90 to 100 days to film, and then you have reshoots and VFX on top of that. And there were reportedly some pretty extensive reshoots with this movie. And so just from a production standpoint, regardless of what your thoughts are on the movie, like this is just a disaster in the making.
Yeah, and I guess is this your least favorite Disney Star Wars movie? Because I think it is for me.
This is my least favorite Star Wars movie. Just out of all.
Oh gosh.
Like I really struggled with that. Just because I know I'm aware of what the prequels are, but even with something like The Phantom Menace, where it's just a complete mess of execution, like you can at least see what George Lucas was trying to get at, and some of that substance is at least there. It's just not put together well. I mean, they're very dialogue heavy movies, but Lucas doesn't know how to write dialogue. But the thought is still there. And then this movie, my gut reaction was just, this is nonsense. Like there wasn't any thought put into any of these characters and who they were or where they were going. Wasn't any thought really put into the plot other than how many like MacGuffin objects can we shove into a movie. And I just loathed this movie from the minute I read the dead speak to the minute the credits started rolling.
Yeah, it's I really struggle with it too, because I actually updated my rankings of the Star Wars movies up on the site, which you can look at now. But I had this movie, if we're not going to consider the holiday special and Battle of Endor and all those little weird little nuggets that are out there, but out of the 11 like official canon movies. I had this 10th. So I'm kind of on the same wavelength as you. I think this movie is really bad. Um, for some reason, I don't. It's tough because I was really bitter at this movie in the moment. I think all of the fan service in here is just, it was just unbelievably nauseating. I think I sent out a tweet right after I saw the movie where I think I said "fuck you" to the last shot in the theater. It is just really bad pandering on all facets. But yeah, like you said, like some of the prequels, like yeah, they are not as slick. These Disney movies look great and the acting is far superior, but there are genuine ideas in there that I think a lot of just hardcore Star Wars fans have really glommed onto. I think in theory, a lot of the political stuff that George Lucas was doing, it works really nicely and I think could be really epic. I mean, obviously we don't need to relitigate how bad the prequels are in some points and all the talk of sand and how all that doesn't work. I think Attack of the Clones is probably my least favorite Star Wars movie. But yeah, it is so messy and things just don't make sense. I really think a lot of like people who like this movie, and you can like this movie if you want, it's totally fine with me. I don't really care. Live your life. But a lot of it, I think, really does fall back on how good these movies look and how easy it is to trick people with good production design and just decent acting at this point. Because this script is just really horrible and things. It's just the pacing is all over the place. I don't think there's a second in this movie that you can breathe. There's just bringing new things up and destroying past lore and just writing itself into a hole and getting it out of a hole with plot conveniences. Yeah, it's really rough. And I guess my last thought here is I just don't know how the Force works after 11 of these movies. It feels like we're just adding new ideas to it to kind of look cool or either just kind of write ourselves just out of a corner. I don't really understand kind of what the rules of the Star Wars universe are. And honestly, I don't even understand what Rey was supposed to be as a character. I just don't really, I kind of felt no satisfaction leaving this trilogy. And it's really a bummer.
Yeah, I don't think this movie had any real clear understanding of any of its characters. And I mean, especially like Finn, who's probably had the most constant grand arc going throughout these movies, starting off as a stormtrooper and growing into somebody who's not just fighting for Rey because he's into her, but somebody who's fighting for a cause and the rebellion in general. And then in this movie, he just kind of shouts things. And there's one scene where he tells Rey he really needed to tell her something. She asks him what, like 2 minutes later, and he never comes back to it ever again for the rest of the movie. And that's just a pretty good summation of what the characters do in this movie. Like Rey has been accused of being a Mary Sue in the first two movies. I think that's absolute baloney, especially compared to Luke and Anakin. But then in this movie, I think unfortunately that's really true. We see her literally do things with the Force that have never been done in any of these other movies, and yet she's complaining about how she's not strong enough or ready enough, but she's literally kicking every other Jedi and Sith's ass just with how much Force she can use. And it's just, it ties back into that fan service, and you look at all these new side characters in the movie and even some of the returning characters like Lando, who just is kind of there just to be Lando, and then the only thing he really does you don't even see on screen when he rallies people to the cause. He supposedly has a daughter, which JJ's kind of already been on the explanation tour with this movie, which we could touch on in a little bit. But it just, none of these characters have any real meaning. And you have like all these new characters like Kerry Russell's character, who is just like Poe, but in a mask. And then I can't even remember the character of this girl who's just Finn, but a woman. And that's just all this movie is filled with.
Yeah, I wonder how many days Kerry Russell was on set. Because I guess we'll go into minor spoilers here, and then I guess we'll alert everyone listening just in case they haven't seen the movie. But I mean, you've seen this movie because everyone has. But like, I wonder because it's just like Kerry Russell's character is just like you see her eyes in one scene, and then she just kind of is in the full suit. And I wonder if they just got a body double, and then Kerry Russell is just making bank, just like giving her voice to this role. But yeah, just the idea of like bringing Palpatine back at all, I just feel like is just such a bad and just pandering move. Just to bring him back as he's not, just kidding. He was the author of all this pain. It's like a weird Spectre thing that we saw with James Bond, where it's like, oh, just kidding. I've been behind all this all along, and now I'm going to raise the Sith again. And it just feels so like unnecessary and forced, and it just kind of breaks. I thought it really broke down everything that the last two movies had set up, if anything. It's just, and just Ray, just her kind of lineage thing. It's just, I don't like a single choice this movie makes whatsoever.
Yeah, like Rey's whole arc in Last Jedi was that her ancestry, like her lineage, didn't really matter, right? She was her own person, and she could have a say in her destiny. And then this movie is like, nope, you're only significant because some old guy had a grandkid, and that's you. And yeah, it's just it really does not understand its characters and just tries to throw in these little fan service moments. Like even um, answering where Snoke came from was one of the big complaints that Last Jedi haters had. They're like, oh, well, now we don't know his origin, which doesn't really matter because the story's not about him. But this movie is like, oh, well, I created him, and then that's it. So it doesn't really give you an answer. It gives you a brief explanation, but then stupid people are like, oh, yeah, now this makes sense because now our favorite character, Palpatine, was in charge the whole time. Hell yeah, Star Wars. And that's just all this movie is.
It's really true. This movie moves so fast. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of smart in how it's not being smart because things move so fast that you're before you can question something, the movie's throwing 15 more things at you. So if you're one of those people that is like you have people like a movie might just like wash over you or something like that, you don't really quite get into the nitty gritty of it, then you might think this movie's okay because there's just a lot of crap thrown at you. It's just really really tough, and it really bothers me how much this movie, as you mentioned before, really kind of cuts, really slashes the knees of Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi, because I just really love how that movie ended, where it really made the Force kind of like an egalitarian type of thing, where anyone can have it, and it doesn't really matter where you come from, like we mentioned before. But yeah, we're just kind of spinning in circles in this point. And just kidding, it's Rey is really important because she comes from Palpatine or whatever, and whatever. Now the Force only matters to a select few, which just feels really fake and kind of just goes against everything that these movies were going towards, and it's really frustrating. And I think a really good example of how much this movie just kind of just disbanded a lot what was coming before it was in the character of Rose, who's just kind of there. Uh, like Finn just kind of pats her on the back and says, "Nah, you stay here. We'll go on the journey." And she's like, "Oh, okay." And she's just there, in the jungle with the rest of the resistance. It's really bad because she was built up to be this sort of important character to Finn. Now we have brought in, yeah, like you said, I don't remember what the other woman was who was supposed to be Woman Finn. I can't remember her name at all, and so she's kind of replacing Rose in that respect. It rings really false. It's really terrible to me.
And I mean, it's people complain about The Last Jedi, kind of stepping on the Force Awakens toes, which if you actually watch the movie with your brain on, you can see that it's just not doing what you expected. Whereas this movie is like actively going back and just stepping on what The Last Jedi and even what The Force Awakens did, which is why I don't fully blame JJ for this, because I really don't think his intention was to trample on what he set up originally too. Which is, I think Disney meddled in this movie quite a bit just after The Last Jedi kind of tension around that, and then with Solo bombing pretty hard, I think they were scared and really just forced their hands in here a lot and made this literally the worst Star Wars movie.
Yeah, this is really just a panic job by Disney. They got nervous after The Last Jedi, which performed pretty well. Like it still made 1.6 billion, but obviously that was definitely down from what The Force Awakens made, and then there was a bunch of controversy and Rotten Tomatoes scores and all that stuff that just makes it very tiring. But yeah, it just, like we mentioned, like they just kind of threw this at JJ. It was like, please do something, and he was like, okay, fine. But yeah, I think we're at the place now where I'm kind of done with Star Wars for the time being. Like I really hope that they kind of take a break from making feature films for like a decade at the very least, because we know that they're never going to stop. They're not going to stop after this one and be like, oh, you know what? Yeah, we're done. We're just going to focus on merchandising and park stuff. Like they're going to make more Star Wars movies until both of us are off this earth and way beyond it. But they need to take a break, because I'm very done with what this is. I'm very annoyed. I can't stand the fan service. it's just far too much. And these movies, they kind of just they stopped being movies after a second, and then they're just kind of trying to service a crowd that um, it's just frustrating. There's literally nothing in this film. It's really it's really annoying.
Yeah, and I think it's nice that we'll get a breather for a little bit. So there's not a new Star Wars movie scheduled till 2022, which means we have 2 years that are completely Star Wars movie free, which means that this upcoming movie really has 3 years of genuine development time, which will be nice. And yeah, we're getting a little bit of Disney Plus content, but I think they're really pulling back. And I think with Kathleen Kennedy stepping down here within the next, I think, year or so, it'll really help reshape the franchise and really make it what it was. Honestly, when George Lucas had it, it was just something that was much more contained and put together with a clear, singular vision. Even if that vision is bad, at least it's consistent. I think that's one thing that people don't really seem to understand about this movie is, and I'm going to talk about The Last Jedi again, but they treat it like, oh, well, Rian Johnson came in and ruined JJ's franchise. But this was never supposed to be something that JJ Abrams was returning to. Like this was going to Colin Trevorrow from Jurassic World. And then it ended up, they offered it to Rian Johnson. He said no. And then Bob Iger really liked JJ, so they gave it back to JJ, and he kind of got stuck with the bill. So I feel for him, although I don't think he's free from responsibility, but I don't think he should bear the full brunt of it.
Yeah, he's fine. He made millions of dollars off this movie. Like he's fine. He can take it. He'll be okay. Um, it's really interesting because you say that the next Star Wars movie is in 2022, and I don't really know what that's going to be because I feel like for a long time it was going to be Rian Johnson directed his trilogy, then Benioff and Weiss were supposed to do things, and then they left. We might even see that slate change. I have no idea. So, but yeah, I think it's very imperative for Disney just to take a break here because I feel like we're getting I'm getting overheated about this movie and like I'm just like done with Star Wars at this point. Like it's just kind of a nuisance more than anything I really care about. But like we all need to just relax and take a breather, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. We just maybe not chase the profits for a second. You might reap benefits down the road.
Yeah, and yeah, this movie was just, as a lifelong Star Wars fan, was just disappointing. Like this movie was just absolutely depressing. And I know I'm going to be on
it's a
more of
turd.
the extreme side. I'm going to be on more of the extreme side of hating it, just because I think it's a total garbage fire of a movie. I talked about how I would have rather seen the documentary about Jar Jar going to the proctologist than watch this movie, because at least it would have been something consistent with a purpose. And I can understand if people like this movie. I mean, there were a few decent parts of it, but overall, it's not a good movie. If you say it's a good movie, you're lying to yourself. So
Yeah, there's a couple good scenes that don't really make sense outside of just in that scene itself. Like that's really all it comes down to. It's like it really feels like I heard someone say it feels like 12 movies in one. And it really does because it's just moving all over the place and there's action and there's excitement in quotation marks. It's just flying all over the place, but it doesn't really amount to anything. So yeah, it's a lot and it's really frustrating, but whatever. I don't know.
I think this movie has 1.5 like genuinely emotional scenes. And so I'm going to talk about Chewbacca because I think he was in the best and the worst example of what this movie has to offer. So on the worst side, he has a fake death that's really obvious and is revealed as a fake death literally within 2 minutes and has no emotional context with the characters. But when a character actually dies later in the movie, Chewie is the only one that gets like a moment of breathing room in the movie. And you actually see him get like kind of pissed and ragey and depressed. And like the Wookiee is the only character that really shows any emotion in this movie. And so I do appreciate that moment they gave him, but it's kind of sad that he was the best actor in a movie filled with talented actors.
Yeah, it's really rough. And even like the Chewbacca scene where it's like, oh, just kidding, he was in a different transport. He's fine. Don't worry about it. Like this movie's constantly rewriting other movies and rewriting itself. And yeah, it's a mess. It really is a mess. I don't really know who this satisfies, but I don't know. Someone out there likes it. It made a good amount of money, even though it's down from the last movies. So I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm interested to see if this actually crosses a billion. Just because I'm not sure how the legs will go.
Oh, I
Because
think it
I mean, we're
will.
seeing it start off slower, but I'm just curious to see what its legs are like.
I think it'll squeak past a billion. I think that's definitely going to happen. But yeah, it's going to be like Jedi was 1.6. Like it's not going to get anywhere near that. Like I would say at maximum 1.1 billion, and I think that's me being generous. But I feel like it'll probably squeak by, and or Disney will try to keep it in theaters as long as possible so it gets there. They'll figure out a way to game the system.
Avengers Endgame's opening weekend gross will probably eclipse this movie, which is just wild.
Maybe it's very possible.
Yeah, so I think that's enough Star Wars until we inevitably get into an all Star Wars pod just breaking this movie apart.
Yeah, it's gonna happen.
But
I'm embracing myself for it.
we'll talk about a much better movie, which is Jumanji: The Next Level, which pulled in $26 million this weekend, which is about a 55% drop. But considering Star Wars opened up against it, that's not really anything to shake a stick at right now, sitting at about $313 million worldwide. And if it's anything like its predecessor, it's going to have pretty strong legs, especially here in the next week with Christmas and New Year's coming up.
Yeah, this is right where Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle really hit its stride, and I think it just killed like even into January as well. So we'll see where it goes from here. But yeah, I don't think this is gonna get to that 900 million mark like the last Jumanji did. I think that was kind of like a weird zeitgeisty thing that I don't think it can be replicated. But like this movie was cost 125 million. Sony was really smart with keeping this budget pretty reasonable. So it's probably already made its budget back, and then some when you factor in marketing and promotional costs. So yeah, it's doing really solidly, and it's just a really fun, silly, stupid movie. You get to see The Rock do a Danny DeVito impersonation, which isn't very good, but it's still really funny because he's trying. And then Kevin Hart just being Danny Glover. It's just really fun, and I think that's going to work really well over the holidays.
And I mean, I would like to call Aquafina's Danny DeVito impersonation as well. It's just great.
Oh, it's
and one of
it's
the best
it's
parts
definitely
for
the
me.
better one. It's definitely the better impersonation of the movie. Just the fact that The Rock is trying to do something is I feel like is just makes it really goofy and fun. But yeah, if like Aquafina is just like pitch perfect in this movie. It's hilarious.
Yeah, and I mean, this movie is really self-aware of what it is and why you're coming to see it, and it doesn't really dwell on anything else. It gives you just that, and that's why I guess the second Jumanji really blew me away 2 years ago, and this one I was like, all right, I'm in, and I can't wait to see what they do with it next.
Yeah, it's these movies are very much four quadrant movies. They're trying to appeal to everybody, and it's kind of weird because they're one of the few to actually pull it off, where everyone kind of goes into these and sees them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that was fun," and then they move on with their lives. Like everyone just is like, "Oh yeah, that was a perfectly fine time at the movies," which is very funny with likable actors that are really fun. So yeah, that's just kind of all it is, and that's all it ever aspires to be. And sometimes you just kind of need those kind of movies.
They're a nice breath of fresh air sometimes.
Especially from
And
something
so,
like Star Wars.
especially in the week we've had this week, it's nice to have something reliable there.
Yeah, we'll get to cats in a second. I have many thoughts.
Uh, but before we get to cats, we'll touch in on Frozen 2, which I don't know if we have a ton to say on. It's already crossed a billion, still moving pretty strong. It's gonna kill the next 2 days, next 3 days really, and the rest of the week just with the holidays coming up.
Yeah, I think the only thing that to look for here, because it's already a crazy good success, but it's just a matter if it'll pass the first Frozen or not, which made a little under 1.3 billion worldwide, and this is a little over 1.1. If I had to bet on this, I would say it probably passes that number, just with the holidays coming up. But yeah, it's just Frozen's just doing really well, and even when Disney like sort of loses with Star Wars, they're still winning. So just for everyone to keep in perspective.
And with that and a quick deep breath, we will move on to Cats, which this movie is it's been like captivating film Twitter for the past year. And it finally released this weekend to $6 million and some change domestically, sitting at about 10.7 worldwide. And that's on a $95 million budget. So um, I can't even talk about this movie. Cats is just been a flop in every sense of the word. I mean, critically, it's been panned, but not hated. Everyone who's seen it really seems to take something out of it, even though it's just one of the worst train wrecks they've ever seen. This is, I mean, it's a train wreck. You cannot look away. Cats is here and it needs your attention.
This movie is incredible, and just in all the wrong ways. It is one of the most stupendous just misfires from a big studio we've probably seen this decade. It's just the first scene, we open to like a starry night, and one of the clouds is a cat, which leaves out. It has a little meow sound in it. So that's the first scene of the movie. So immediately you're like, okay, I'm turned off to this. And then we pan down and we go into a really dingy, horribly shot alley, and there's just really bizarre cats that you've seen in the trailers that are horribly rendered by CGI, and we'll get to in a second there. And it's just really bad synthy, kind of like trying to be like weird cocaine fueled 80s music, and it just really flops hard. And I think that was the second that my jaw dropped, and it did not close until this movie was over, because it is one of the most incredible things to feast your eyes on. It is just terrible all the way around. The music is atrocious. It is off-putting to look at it every single time, every single second of it. And it is, like you said, it is a train wreck, the slowest train wreck you could ever feast your eyes on. It is, oh my gosh, I'm in a loss for words. It's unsettling, hilarious at times, and also times just incredibly boring and not fun at all. It is. I am a new man after seeing Cats. It is one of the most bizarre things.
Um, and unlike Star Wars this weekend, Cats actually did something pretty unprecedented and basically released a patch to fix some broken and non-functioning visual effects in the movie, which is just insane. That, I mean, they did it literally after 2 days of release. They sent out thousands of replacement copies, basically. And when you get movies, they're not on film reels anymore unless you're Tarantino, but they're these little basically canisters that have the movie stored on them like a hard drive, and they literally sent out thousands of replacement hard drives to fix this movie this weekend, which is just bizarre and wild.
Yeah, and honestly, that wasn't going to fix your problems here, because this movie is atrocious. But it's so funny because everyone's talking about like how poor the CGI looks and everything like that, and it really does. It looks awful, because there's one scene where Jennifer Hudson's she's just giving her all, trying to sing Memories, which is like the one famous song out of Cats, and she's giving it her all, and she's really trying, and she's like doing that one thing where actors do when they cry, and they start to like their their snot starts to come out. And the fact that we have Jennifer Hudson, who is like snot crying, and then she has like CGI fur that this snot is rolling through, is just it's just unbelievable nightmare fuel. It just ruins like the one possible moment in this movie that could have been like maybe like a decent emotional beat. It's insane. But even people were mentioning all weekend how like arms weren't rendered. Judi Dench's arm just like doesn't exist in one scene, or maybe it's another character, I can't remember. And apparently there's another scene where there's just a crew member in a hoodie in the background, and I feel like I was just so astonished by how terrible this movie was that I didn't notice any of this. I was just so amazed and like how terrible like all this is, where some like the periphery stuff I just did not notice whatsoever, because it is so terrible. It's one of those things that I can't describe, and it's definitely a theatrical experience that I will never forget, because I think the entire audience I saw it with was silent the entire time, because I don't think anyone in the audience knew what to do with this. Like, it is balls to the walls insanity. It's really just, I can't do this.
Yeah, and I've seen people are already trying to start a movement for this to just kind of have staggering success like The Greatest Showman. So when that released
That
two
is
years
not going to
ago,
happen.
when that released 2 years ago, it debuted at around $8 million worldwide, but it ended up at $435 million by the time it finished its run, just because the word of mouth was ridiculously phenomenal with it. But I don't see that with Cats. Most people that I know that have seen it are like, I'm glad I went because it was an experience, but that movie is it's hard to describe.
I see that the one possible future I see for this movie is that we watch it at midnight screenings in like a decade or so, and we get to laugh at it, and maybe I don't know, maybe we throw spoons at the screen when there's like a really bad like rendered CGI moment in it or something like that. That's like the only thing I see for this because the only way you should see this is if you're incredibly drunk, and I'm really disappointed that I wasn't when I saw this movie. I tried to be a really good, upstanding critic and look at this movie through whatever critical eye I have, and then 5 seconds in, I was like, oh, I should have had like 10 drinks before I got into this theater, because it's just like you can't like review it. Like there's just nothing to it. It's just cats take turns singing who they are and what they do, and then the movie's over. That's it. There's no plot. There's just Idris Elba is there. He poofs out of scenes with magic. He yells ineffable, whatever. I don't know how you say that word, but whatever. He says that, and then he disappears, and that's it. And then Ray Winstone is there from Ray Winstone of Sexy Beast, Departed, and all these other big time movies as like a thug. He's just there as a cat. Rebel Wilson unzips her fur at one point to show more fur, which is just like the most incredible thing. Like it's equal parts like what am I watching and also unsettling that I can't like understand what's happening there. And at one point there's dancing cockroaches that are also humanoid people who they were just people that they danced and just made them into cockroaches. It's just the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. Yeah, this movie is a clusterfuck. It is. It is. I want to recommend it to people, but I also want them to run for the hills. I don't really know what to do.
Yeah, I am weirdly fascinated by it, so I know I'll get to it. Just because I don't want to miss out on the insanity.
Honestly, it's better if you just take in the memes on Twitter. It's like that's really like the best place where this movie like lives. It is so bizarre. And I mean, if we're just going to even talk about the movie like itself behind all the weirdness, which is really hard to get past, but the music just isn't very good. And Tom Hooper, I think, really directs this movie horribly. Everything just looks terrible. Like we're just in like a dingy alleyway at some points, or just a really ugly looking CGI city, or like I feel really bad for the lead cat in this, who's her name's Francesca Hayward, and she's just a really like she's a world-renowned ballet dancer, and you can kind of tell at times where she's just really incredible at dancing. But Tom Hooper just doesn't know how the hell to shoot her. Like he either points the camera right at her face, and you just like can't see what she's doing, or like she's just like he zooms out to like 60,000 feet away, so she's only like a weird like tiny little blip, and amidst like a bunch of other really scary CGI cats. This movie's just all over the place. Like even like just getting past all the weirdness of it, it just fails in every level. It is truly a disaster piece in every sense of the word.
I can't wait.
Please do yourself a favor. Please drink yourself under the table before you see it. That's just the best way to do it. It's crazy. I can't.
And so moving on, we'll round out the top five with Knives Out, which was sitting at $6.125 million this weekend, had another 33% drop, and has just been doing phenomenally. It's getting pretty close to $200 million worldwide, which this coming week with Christmas and New Year's is going to help it push past that.
Yeah, this movie is definitely going to benefit really nicely from the holidays. We're definitely going to see it go over 200 million. I don't know how high it'll get from there. I think it'll definitely get past 100 million here in the U.S. But yeah, it's just good job on Rian Johnson. He's winning even when Star Wars isn't quite. He's coming out as a big time winner with his next movie. So yeah, it's just nothing really much to add here. It's just Knives Out just continues to be great and successful. So good for them.
They actually did do something also kind of unprecedented this week, and they released an official in-theater commentary. so you can
Oh,
download it on your
cool.
phone and get a director's commentary while you're watching the movie. So that's a very Ryan Johnson thing to do, but I also think that's
Very
really cool,
much.
and I'm definitely going to go see it again with that. But
Yeah, that's a cool little note. Good for him. I love Ryan Johnson. He's a cool dude.
yeah, I mean, he closed out the decade with three critically, commercially successful movies that were each genre defining, and Knives Out's just the latest. And so that wraps up the top five, but we did have some new releases that didn't quite make it. So the first one is Bombshell, which is actually number 6 at the box office this week, which expanded. So it was just in 4 theaters last week, expanded to about 14, almost 1,500 this week, and pulled in just a little bit over 5 million. So it's not off to just a phenomenal start. We're kind of seeing it perform like Richard Jewell did last week, even though it's targeted at a very different audience. And I think this movie, I'm just kind of indifferent on it. Like, it was okay. I think it was slightly more good than it was bad, but it's a very odd movie.
Yeah, I'm almost exactly the same as you here. It's definitely a very mixed bag where um, the director Jay Roach, he did Austin Powers years ago, and he's been doing other politically inclined movies ever since. Like he's done a bunch for HBO. He did The Campaign with Will Ferrell and Zach Galifianakis. So weirdly, this kind of movie kind of fits his interests at the very least. But yeah, this movie's at first is breaking the fourth wall and trying to be kind of the Big Short kind of style, and it's the same screenwriter, so that makes sense. There's actually one really cool special effect that this movie does where it kind of burns the Fox News logo into the screen, which I thought that was a really cool little trick there. But yeah, then it gets very serious and just you really feel the weight of that for a hot second, and then it kind of fizzles out. It feels like when the movie's ending, like it feels like the third act was supposed to be starting. Like the Murdochs just show up and they're obviously important kind of slightly like people have opinions on them and they just show up and then the movie's over. Very strange. I feel like this movie doesn't really serve any kind of audience because it's trying to do so many different things and it doesn't do any of them very well. It's very except from Charlize Theron looking just like astonishingly close to Megyn Kelly, which is just like very haunting in how good she is there. Yeah, I don't really know what to make of this thing.
Yeah, and it feels like really inconsistent with its characters. So Megan Kelly is the character you spend the most time with, but the main character, the one who the story is kind of supposed to be about, is Margot Robbie's character, who's called Kayla, and she's just like an amalgam of some real life people that didn't want their names out, I guess. Um, and she like makes all the decisions, but she's not really part of the action, and so that comes off really weird. And then for a movie that's about sexual assault and manipulation of the workplace, just kind of on Roger Ailes' part, this movie is really kind of sex and mature averse. Like it kind of steers as far away from those things as it can, which when you're really getting into a very deep and kind of unpleasant subject like this one is, I think you really have to go more into that R-rated territory rather than steering clear from it.
Yeah, it's trying like the first act is all about kind of Megyn Kelly's war on Trump when he had the period joke on TV and things like that. Then she kind of confronted him at the Republican National Convention. But then after that, like the movie takes a sharp left turn into other things. That's when Margot Robbie's Kayla gets more involved, and we kind of see Nicole Kidman just kind of doing things as Gretchen Carlson. So yeah, this feels like a first draft where you want to get as much in the screenplay as possible, but then after that you kind of like chip away at the things that are important and get rid of the other things. And yeah, so I didn't really feel anything to this movie. It's definitely it's incredibly well intentioned, obviously, because it's dealing with sexual assault in the workplace, and that's obviously really important. But it's just like it's at points it just wants to be like a fun like, hey, look at this actor who looks kind of like Rudy Giuliani type of thing. Like it wants to be a who's who of like, oh, look at all these crazy things we can do. But then yeah, it never quite gets to like the root of this issue, and I left wanting more, and not in a good way. It's pretty frustrating.
And there's one shot in particular that is like cat's level bad CGI, and that's the actor that they used to make Bill O'Reilly. Just has terrifying eyes in that scene because they kind of intercut between actual documentary footage of some of these real life people like Roger Ailes and like Bill O'Reilly, but then for most of the story they're played by an actual actor, and they use CGI to make this guy look more like Bill O'Reilly, and his eyes have haunted my nightmares for the past 2 days. Um, but so has John Lithgow. I really enjoyed him in this movie. I've enjoyed him in pretty much everything I've seen him in, but I don't see him really take like a truly demented and evil kind of turn, and he really does that in this movie a lot.
Yeah, he's definitely, a lot of the work he does is just really nasty and really affecting. And I think if this movie would have focused a little more on that, it would have been really effective. Because there's one scene between him and Margot Robbie, which is just unbelievably affecting and really rough to sit through, and it just really kind of gets at what this movie is ultimately trying to do. And Margot Robbie is just really acting tremendously in that scene as well. Yeah, it's really tough because there's definitely some good work in here, and Charlize Theron is just incredible as Megyn Kelly. Like, she has the voice and she looks just so much like her. It is really scary to me. And then Nicole Kidman is just doing really good stuff when she's given the screen time. But yeah, it's really tough. I just don't quite get what this movie was going for. It's ultimately, I left and I put my hands up. I was like, I don't know. I really don't know what to do here.
Yeah, and I do want to call attention to Kate McKinnon in this movie because I think she did a really good job as well, just kind of being a foil for Margot Robbie's character and just showing a little bit more of her dramatic chops. So she is kind of the comedic relief in this movie, but she does have some solid drama that she adds to it as well.
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the really good parts of this movie that I like. And I think Kate McKinnon's just been flat out bad in every like dramatic movie she's tried to be in. But I think she works really nicely in this because she works as sort of how kind of just toxic the media industry can be, where her character got a job in Fox News because she applied everywhere else, and this is the only place she got a job, and she's a Democrat, and now that she works at Fox News, she's kind of stuck and she can't really go anywhere. And I think there's something really interesting to dive into there. But the movie doesn't quite do much with it. This movie mentions a lot of things and expects you to think that that's really like profound and holds a lot of weight, but it never really kind of dives in and really picks at anything. It's ultimately, I just would have liked to see maybe this movie get like half an hour tacked onto it, or just maybe someone comes in to clean up the script. It feels like we saw something that could have been really solid if it had more eyes on it.
Yeah. So I think it's a very okay movie. It doesn't really lean to either side.
It is fine.
So with that, we'll move on to A Hidden Life, which actually expanded a little bit. It's still in a very limited release, so it's only playing in about 106 theaters worldwide right now. But it played this weekend, earned a solid 250,000, and I'm not sure how much more it's going to expand because it is very niche and very artsy. But it's off to a decent start for where it's at right now.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention this movie because this is probably the best movie to either expand or get a wide release this weekend. I mean, it wasn't very hard when you consider its competition was Star Wars and Cats. But The Hidden Life was purchased by Fox Searchlight, which they do a lot come Oscar time, and I assumed they thought this was going to do really well for that. And it doesn't quite seem like it's kind of getting that kind of Oscar buzz that I was hoping for there. So I don't think it's going to reach out and go wide at some point like they would have hoped. But it is a really thoughtful, just, I want to say sweet, but it's just really emotionally involved movie from Terrence Malick. So if you've ever seen a Terrence Malick movie, Badlands, Tree of Life, or the Thin Red Line, he's a very meditative filmmaker, and this movie is 3 hours long. So that's really tough, and it's a lot of people whispering and writing letters to each other, and there's a lot of voiceover as the camera just kind of lingers on like a tree or something like that. It's a lot of thoughtfulness going on here. I would just say people to seek it out. I think it's a really beautiful movie. It doesn't quite always work, and I think Terrence Malick has done much better things in his career, but I think this movie gets at a lot of really good ideas about pacifism, and it's a really good. I would compare it to Martin Scorsese's Silence. They share a lot of things in common there, but it's really terrific. It's one I would wholly recommend. Maybe if you can't see it in theaters, definitely seek it out at some point, because it's not going to expand. I don't think it, like you mentioned before, I don't think it's going to expand very large, and I don't think a lot of people will have the chance to see it in theaters. But I would say seek it out at some point, because I think you will be very rewarded by it.
Yeah, and so that pretty much wraps up this weekend at the box office. And next weekend, we've got some of my most anticipated movies for the year. We've got Uncut Gems with its wide release, Little Women also with a wide release.
Yes.
Those two are probably going to end up in my top 10 list. And then we've also got Spies in Disguise opening up on Christmas Day, as well as 1917 with its Christmas Day preview before it goes wide in January. So it's going to be a pretty exciting week.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of 1917, but I think that movie's going to strike a chord with a lot of people. I would just say go see Uncut Gems and Little Women, because those movies will definitely be on my top 10 of the year. I can say right now, unless something crazy happens and I see like 10 great movies in the next like 2 days, like they're going to be there. So yeah, definitely seek those out, because they're really fun in their own rights. Yeah, it's December. It's going to be, the Christmas is going to be really cool. There's a lot of really interesting movies. Even Spies in Disguise looks kind of weird and fun, which I'm here for. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one, but the other two, I'm all here for.
It just looks so It looks so stupid that I'm kind of like, whatever, let's do it.
I mean, Ben Mendelsohn is in it, so I'll probably jump on board for that. But
yeah, well, Will Smith is a bird, sure. Like, whatever. Fine.
Yeah, so with that, feel free to check us out online at MovieBabbleReviews.com, and we'll be here next week talking about Uncut Gems, Spies in Disguise, and Little Women.